thought we gave up on doing those manually.
I was going to say fibre energies. Fibre vibes.
We have managed the first point on our housekeeping, and it's 15 minutes into the recording, Georgia.
There were 2 points. Also the Hungarian Revolution.
Welcome to the Yarn Library podcast with me, Adam Cleveley.
And me, Georgia Denham. And this is our second attempt because the first time Adam caught me off guard by introducing himself as me.
I'll stop doing that. It's not fair.
No, it's fun. I like the energy of it. I just was not, I was not in the right place to receive it.
Not ready for a joke. I didn't have my sign up telling you that it was a joke. So...
No, you didn't. For those watching the podcast, and maybe those listening, I don't know, they might be able to tell. We are not in our usual setup. We are remote today. Our scheduling didn't quite line up. And so we've had to take desperate measures. We've got pretty good signal. I can see you pretty well this time. But in the past, maybe not.
Yeah, no, sometimes it gets a bit difficult, but hopefully everything will hold up. And it's all brilliant. I mean, this is exactly. The whole point of this podcast is a platform that is... The software we use is capable of being remote and all the rest of it. And, well, we're going to talk about this at the end, but our next series, we're hoping to invite lots of people onto this podcast and talk about interviews and so on. So it better work.
Yeah, it's good practice, I think, for us to do a couple like this. And if the format works, then maybe it will make things easier for us to record these other episodes when it's just us as well. So let's see. Well, today we had... one topic in mind, and then we shifted things around because I was going through some of our emails last night and found one that was from a while back and we hadn't responded. And so today we're going to talk about knitting in public, which, funnily enough, you mentioned software, Adam. It's a bit deja vu, isn't it?
A little bit deja vu. Hopefully this isn't some sort of cursed topic for us because we've recorded this one already. I mean, as a topic, knitting in public, we did.
Yeah. So last year, you may remember that we had the kind of game of wool, and then we also had peppered in only twice with these other alternative topic episodes. And then it proved that it was going to be too much for us to do 2 a week. One of them that was supposed to be like episode 6 or 5 or whichever way around it would be was knitting in public. And we recorded it. And what happened, Adam?
The audio just completely screwed up. We weren't able to salvage it. And we only record audio once. So that was the end of it.
It was the end of it. And it was such a good episode. Like, it was such a good conversation. I think it's really where we found a kind of a rhythm and didn't get to do it. Alas.
Luckily for us, we get to do it again. Though I slightly worry because the other things we've got on our sort of agenda of housekeeping, I'm a little bit worried about how much time we're going to have to talk about knitting in public. Structure
and calm, and we'll be fine.
Let's rattle through it.
Yeah, so quite a few things on housekeeping. First thing, I see some very lovely yarn on your microphone, Adam. Could you please tell me more about the yarn that is on your wonderful microphone?
Well, because we're doing this remotely, I was able to use my woolen microphone setup, which I know and love, and is very popular. And I was about to pick a ball of wool, and then I suddenly realised that I should pick this Bilum yarn that I have for a couple of reasons. One, it's the only Hungarian yarn that I have. Bilum is a Hungarian dyer, and it's funny, whenever I've seen it at a yarn festival, I buy it because I can't resist it. And I haven't knitted anything with it until now, and I've just started knitting with it. So not the specific skein, but so I'm very excited about that. Obviously, also, time of recording, it is Monday the 13th of April. There were Hungarian elections yesterday, and I think most of the world is probably quite pleased about the result of that, and that's worth celebrating and at least drawing attention to Hungary as a country I absolutely love and feel passionately about. So, yeah, there's a shout out for Bilum yarns as well.
When we came to the conversation, I was already thinking, like, how can I shoehorn in a, like, yay, Hungary mention, and thought about Bilum yarns, and then turned up on the call and you already had it laid out. So I'm very, very grateful for that. I am, of course, married to a Hungarian, and over the weekend, we were looking after my niece and nephew. And so being with them yesterday, it was actually really emotional because my little niece and nephew get to grow up in a very different country now. That's something I posted on my story yesterday. And it's just really lovely. And Dima was very excited and moved. He worked out last night that Orban had been in power since he was in the 8th grade, and he had his finally did his PhD graduation on Saturday. So that's like a huge part of his education. And I think I've seen a shift in him that I've never, the whole time I've known him, he's been ashamed to be Hungarian. And he feels very, very proud to be Hungarian today. So yay, Magyar.
Yay.
Yeah, lovely. So
yay for Hungary. Next on the list is housekeeping. No, not
yes. Well, this is housekeeping, sort of. It's just like a shoehorned housekeeping.
That was point 0. Point 1 on the agenda was the shush, because we talked about last week getting rid of the shush, and there was fair to say an outpouring of emotion about how much people love the shush. And I've been a big fan of the shush. Like the first time I heard it, I remember I laughed. Mm-hmm. But
so last week, on the end of the episode where Adam's saying, oh, because we were going to re-record the end, I kind of looked at you and was like, what? But you said last week you really liked it. So I was like, no, like, off. Like, no, we can change it at the end of the season. It makes my work easier if I can just press a button and it's there as a template. I didn't want to change it. So let me clarify. So we received an email from a listener who's a librarian, and we're gonna read it out in a second. But Adam, is that the reason that you'd said this last week? Had you read this email?
Yeah, I had read the email.
Okay,
and I and it resonated with me, and I just thought, yeah, let's just gently find a way away from the shush. Because before we get any further conversation on it, I'm going to read it out, because I think otherwise people are going to be lost. So we got this email from a librarian. We haven't been invited to share their name, so I'm not going to. But they said, I'm a librarian, and the outro of every episode really me off, so much so that I've begun switching off before the end. Shushing in a library is such a tired trope. Yes, libraries have quiet sections, but they're also noisy, dynamic, and social places. I love the idea that Georgia's saying shh at the end of every episode, but I can't unhear the negative stereotype that follows. I think maybe it should be a shush. Please, as someone who encourages crafting friends to listen to the pod, please stop the shushing. So how do you feel about that email, Georgia?
Adam, very strategically, to try and make it more condensed, missed out the 2 very positive things in that email, which were starting with, I'm listening to the latest episode of the pod and have loved every episode, but since you've invited comment, ... And also ended with, P.S. I love the reference lists, heart emoji. So please don't at this person.
Any positivity that comes into my life just washes over me, and direct criticism, that's the only thing I hear. Sorry.
I took this email very much as like a funny calling in, you know, the calling out versus calling in thing. I've forgotten who the person was pioneer of that, actually. It's very much that they deserve acknowledgement, so I will put it in the notes. But when I read the email, it was like, it clicked. I didn't feel any offense. I didn't feel any didn't feel that much guilt. It was just like, that makes perfect sense to me. I love libraries. They're incredible dynamic community spaces. And straight away I was thinking about the Library of Birmingham opened in 2013. So like 2-3 years before I moved there as a student. And it's the largest public library in the UK and the largest cultural space in Europe. It just suddenly made me think like, wait, of course, like that's one of the things I love about libraries so much. And I don't know if I just watched Monsters, Inc. University with the shushing librarian monster too close to making this or what. But I suppose I just didn't know that this was a thing that off librarians, and that people were actively trying to kind of get away from this idea that libraries were a quiet place. And so naturally I did a bit of a Georgia, and then found loads of really cool articles and things that were talking about the psychology of being silent in different spaces and what a space might do to kind of encourage silence, and like the dangers of silence in libraries and the limitations on learning and engagement. Also some really cool stuff on public consultation and library design and architecture.
Long story short, we're going to change it, or are we not changing it? Where is the long research taken you?
I am completely convinced by this person. I was convinced even before I started reading up on it. I think that it makes sense not to put that there when we've heard from someone who is in this field and points out valuable information. But I know that it's also really fun for people. Like, people like the idea of it. Maybe people like the sassiness of it, the silliness of it. And I would like us to find an alternative. And I wanted to use this platform, this space, to raise the profile and understanding of libraries are dynamic, creative community spaces. And we should all do that.
I will say I don't think we could manage to, like, we can't address every problem in the world on this podcast.
No, but this is one we can.
But I do think that if we've got library in the title, I think we do owe it to ourselves and librarians as well to come up with something. I think between the two of us, we can come up with something else that's funny.
Yes, but I would also be grateful for any suggestions. If anyone has an immediate thought, feeling, suggestion, please do let us know.
A pun that you want us to drop into.
Exactly.
Then we're all ears.
One small, tiny thing. The Library of Birmingham, just my fun fact that I had prepared. Library of Birmingham was designed by a Dutch architect, Francine Hubern, Francine Hubern, and she's also the architect for the current refurbishments of the New York Public Library and also the Martin Luther King Jr. Memorial Library in Washington, D.C. There we go. Thank you. Thank you and good night.
That was your fun fact, Georgia.
That was my fun fact. Oh, one sad thing, though, about the Library of Birmingham. Sorry, this is actually really sad. The council can't really afford to maintain it, so it's closed on Sundays. Even though that's probably like the best day for people to go and use it.
That's the library party day, isn't it, normally?
Yeah, exactly. Anyway, that's issue 2.
I've got a feeling I've got a feeling that wasn't that the one in Birmingham where, I mean, it was an earlier version of that library. There was a I think it was a university level library that was designed somewhere. I think it was in the UK, and the engineers and architects that built it hadn't factored in the weight of the books on the shelves, and the building was unusable.
I have a funny,
but I can't remember which library it was.
It's the Birmingham City University Library, and I know about this because the Birmingham Conservatoire, where I went to university, was part of the umbrella of that group. The site of the original City Library was knocked down and became Paradise Circus precinct thing, and then moved to the Library of Birmingham. The old Conservatoire was on that site, and part of our move to the new building near the Birmingham City University campus was that our library had to move into their library. And there were a lot of issues there. We lost our specialist music librarian, which was really sad. Yeah, that's the library I used to do my undergrad. They didn't factor in the weight of the books, and they had to redistribute all of the books in a weird way. And the stacks were really weirdly spaced out because it was going to fall through the floor otherwise. I didn't realize that was a thing that people knew about. I just thought we just knew about it.
No, that was something that I was taught in my engineering degree because it was a major up.
Yeah, it really was. It really was. It meant that they had to cull a lot of the books that we brought into that library because they needed to streamline. Anyway.
We have managed the first point on our housekeeping, and it's 15 minutes into the recording, Georgia.
There were 2 points. Also the Hungarian Revolution. Okay? Not revolution, but end of the
Wasn't the revolution.
Regime. There's a different one. Well, Adam, where are we moving to next?
What's point 2 on your agenda?
Well, it appears to be an errata, Adam, on sustainability part 2, released on the 2nd of April.
Tone of your voice says it's my turn.
Mm-hmm. As you all know, we like to joke and banter about our sources and referencing. And I believe it was you, Adam, who called yourself a chatty bimbo, and that you should not be trusted for referenced sources because you were delivering opinions.
Do you need a source for me being a chatty bimbo? Is that what you're about to ask me?
No. That was your point. And as you said, you're the one with the opinions. So anyway, hands up. This is not me saying I don't find fibre interesting. It is. It's just not my area of enthusiasm. So when we talk about fibre and fibre choices and I was going to say fibre energies, but like fibre vibes, that's more your remit. Not that I have to let you do that, but that's your thing. When I'm doing the fact checking, I tend to check the big facts because I don't know the sources well enough too. Like, I don't really know what I'm looking for. And then the wonderful and highly respected Roxanne Richardson, who is on YouTube, does loads of tutorial videos, is very well known to me. She's taught me to do so much knitting. we found out recently that she's actually a listener of the podcast. So if she's still listening, hi, Roxanne. And she'd given us a shout out recently, and we rewarded her or thanked her for her trouble with misrepresenting quite a bit of information about merino and fibre length and staple length. And she actually very graciously and not in any kind of shady way commented on the sustainability episode and gave us a bit of a some more information correcting some of the stuff. So how do you want to do this? Like, shall I read it?
You're really mincing your words, Georgia. I mean, just spit it out. She called out, I talked about the length of merino wool as being a longer fibre, and she called out it isn't a longer fibre, it isn't one of the longest breeds. And the reason, if you go to the longest breeds, there's a breed of sheep called Lincoln Long Wool, which is 20 to 40 centimetres long wool. So there are these breeds of sheep which have wool which are extremely long, and actually can be so long that they're difficult for woolen mills to card, so they can be problematically long. And merino is regarded as a short to medium staple, actually. And merino comes in anywhere between about 7 and 18 centimetres. So long wool breeds can be 20 to 40 centimetres. So I was completely wrong about length. So where that came from was that I was talking about Australian wool being softer because it has a longer staple merino, because the ends don't poke if there aren't as many ends because the wool is longer. I mean, it's interesting where it came from, because that came from someone I regarded, someone who knows the Australian wool industry extremely well, and I guess he was trying to sell me on why Australian merino was better than any other merino, because we were having a conversation about South American breeds of sheep. Mm-hmm. Anyway, so that's where that came from. But I'd picked it up and I'd used the information completely incorrectly. I'd hold my hands up and say, yeah, absolutely, I got that wrong. Interestingly, though, I then Googled, like, what's the longest merino sheep? How long does the wool get? I was sort of looking for a ways. Where is this? And there was a poor sheep called Chris that got left for 5 or 6 years in isolation, and the poor sheep nearly died because it was never shorn, and so it amassed this fleece of about 41 kilos.
Yeah,
which ended up with what is possibly the longest merino fleece ever, because that hit 42 centimeters as a result. But that's you couldn't do that because that's utterly cruel to animals. That poor sheep had suffered an awful lot to have that much wool on him.
But a fun fact.
Fun fact, nonetheless.
Yeah, no. The reason I was sort of stumbling around that is because I'm not the fibre girl, and it doesn't really permeate the same way as like some other things in craft do into my noggin. So I needed you to kind of talk through that, because I would just fumble around it. It's something as well that Roxanne said, that I'm by no means an expert on wool breeds, which is very gracious of her. But she said, but I am a spinner who often starts from raw wools in order to truly understand a breed's characteristics. And I feel like that kind of hands-on knowledge, we all have different contexts and different experiences for going into things.
I know that like spinning is a huge weakness of my knowledge area, because it's not something I've engaged with. It just doesn't tickle me in the same way that knitting does. So I know that it's a bit of a blind spot. I'm very grateful for the better information from an expert. And I'm sorry that I that I gave what I thought was an expert's view. I was obviously just wrong, and I should have done a Georgia on it, and I didn't. Sorry, everyone.
Have you been interested in learning to spin?
No.
No. Okay, good. Well, not good, but I thought it was just me, because there's so many people around me who are like, oh my God, I just can't wait till I can get a spinning wheel. I really want to spin, and I want to buy a fleece. Like, that is a logical next step in their sort of crafting, knitting, yarn journey. And it just doesn't appeal to me. And again, not to say it's not amazing, but it's like not where I want to move next. So I'm glad I'm not alone.
Yeah, it's like there's different arts and crafts for everyone. Like spinning isn't one that has grabbed me, not yet. It might do at some point. You never know.
Who knows? Maybe when you start your alpaca farm.
I'm moving on, by the way.
Yes.
Did you see last week on social media? I kind of was having a week off social media, and then I turned Instagram back on. I reinstalled the app, and then I was like, oh, I've missed quite a few things. One of the things that got sent to me was Game of Wool have extended their application deadline.
So Game of Wool is back. We hadn't acknowledged it before, but you'd assumed that they would maybe not be doing it because the dates of filming wouldn't quite correlate. But it looks like they're doing it later on in the year, and they've extended the deadline, which, I mean, we can assume means they
haven't got enough applicants, surely. That's the only reason you do it, is they haven't got enough applicants. I will say, given we didn't cover it, what Game of Wool have ended up doing is they opened up applications a month ago or so, and a really tight deadline, because they said basically you're filming, was it in May and June, I think, something like that. So they were giving about 3 months notice. Well, the applications were meant to be closed now, and then they were running auditions, and then after the auditions you'd have potentially less than a month's notice to then you're taking 7 weeks off. So I think that's a major reason why they may be low on applications, because it's one thing doing an application process into the following year, but doing an application in year where you're expecting to take potentially take 2 months off work.
Yeah,
I think it's a big ask. I know the first round I was told they got, for the first season they had like 10,000 applicants. I can't imagine if they had 10,000 applicants, I can't imagine that they would have extended the deadline. I know that I did see call-outs the previous week. They were looking for more applicants from Scotland and Wales, presumably because they're trying to meet that they want enough people from those regions, because I know they try to regionally balance where contestants come from. So yeah, I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, I mean, we could just present this and it could sound like it's shady, and maybe that's where you're coming from, Adam. I don't know.
I'm not trying to present any shade. I'm just saying where it is. I mean, a lot of listeners came to us because we started. Lots of people didn't like the fact that we started with Game of Wool, but lots of people did come because we were talking about Game of Wool. So I thought it was fair to acknowledge it.
No, it is. What I wanted to say is just that in heart of hearts, I want to see the show in time succeed and be something that I enjoy watching, that actually represents the community and represents the craft. And our issues with the show of past were because we didn't feel that it was doing that very well. It was never straight frustrations with the contestants. So if you are thinking of applying and you're worried that we will chat about you, then maybe
Hold on, I'm not having that. We never chatted about anyone.
That's what I mean. We're not going to do that. We support the contestants. We like the contestants.
You can't say that,
It's
Georgia.
The powers that be.
I have major issues with the way the show was put together. I have
Exactly.
major issues with the editing, the production, everything about it, except the contestants.
No, that's what I mean. If you're worried about that, don't worry, because we like the contestants. It's everything else. And if you want to go and be part of that journey, I commend you. And I think that it's a positive thing. I think that if you want to be part of turning this representation of our beloved craft into a more positive thing, then I commend you, and I think it's a positive thing. That's all I meant.
Excellent. Just remember on your application form, when you're saying, are there any adjustments you need for your knitting, just remember to make sure you have a chair with armrests on it, that you're not sitting on one of the sofas without any support for your arms.
And Cubics needles. I do wonder what changes there are going to be.
I'm fascinated. Also, all of the application stuff, all of the posts that they put out on social media and stuff have entirely been just knitting related. There's not a word of crochet on it, so I'm fascinated to see that.
I wonder if we start to see some of our gripes. I'm not saying it's us specifically, but there was a lot of response from the community, and I wonder if we'll see those things implemented. Alas, the programme that shall not be named. I feel like we should have a code word, an official code word for it. One more thing on Game of Wool, actually. I did have someone message a while back saying that even the mention or thought that we might cover Game of Wool again was enough to make them unsubscribe. I don't think that we would do an episode by episode response. We might mention it here and there, but I think it was quite a lot of labour to do it week by week.
I'd be interested in doing something, but I don't know what format that's going to take. I completely agree. From the way we set out this podcast, absolutely didn't work for either of us. But I'm sorry for one listener. I'm not changing the whole course of how I want to discuss things.
It wasn't because of that one listener. I'd already been thinking like, yeah, we probably in the future won't do like full hour-long episodes that were longer than the episodes themselves discussing every element. And we probably learn lessons from that format. And if we did discuss it, it might be a bit different is all I wanted to say. Okay, so end of housekeeping. Yay! Knitting in public. So we'd had this conversation before. We're having to have this conversation again. But actually, I think that it is vastly improved by a wonderful email that we've had. And, you know, you guys as listeners didn't even know that we'd had this knitting in public conversation. And yet we got an email with the subject line, knitting in public. So how perfect. So lovely email. And I'd actually responded last night. But I'm just going to lead away and let the conversation unfold. So, Adam and Georgia, first I want to say that I love your podcast. See, positivity. I have binged all of the available episodes over the past few weeks. Adam, in episode 16, you made a comment about talking to people in Malawi and elsewhere about being a man who knits. Could you give me some tips for having those conversations? You mentioned that they were making comments about it being a craft for women. How do you respond to that? I learned to knit many years ago out of necessity. My wife crocheted a pair of mittens for me, but the holes allowed too much cold air in. She had no desire to learn to knit at the time, so I had to learn and made my own mittens. They weren't perfect, but they worked. I fell in love with knitting then, but struggled with that false belief that it is only for older women and stopped for a long time. I ended up teaching my wife how to knit continental style, and she quickly became much better than I can ever hope to get. My wife and oldest daughter now operate a fibre arts store with some dear friends of ours, so I have been deeply involved with the craft for the past 18 months. I love the colours of the yarn, the textures and the creativity it affords. I started knitting again recently as a way to reduce my stress. I feel comfortable knitting at the store in front of others, but I can't seem to bring myself to knit in the wild. I'm not very good at it yet. I think that makes me a little uncomfortable to be in public. I've started to blog my journey back to knitting, so I can share my experience and have some anonymity. I'll see if that helps. And they apologised for grammatical errors, but they didn't need to. It's a lovely email. We won't name the person.
Well, I mean, it's an interesting problem, and like I do accept like doing something strange in a public place can be a little bit unnerving, and I guess it probably speaks to my self-confidence that I don't care about that. But the specific questions about like, oh, I see you're knitting. That's interesting. That's something that only women do. Like when I came across that, you know, that wasn't in the UK. I do know that people have had that as a conversation in the UK. So it just hasn't happened to me. And abroad, I feel like it's easier for me to just, you know, talk about the fact that, well, yes, it's interesting, isn't it? And why is it that that's seen as a woman's craft and a woman's hobby? And if you look into the history of it, there's really strong evidence as to why it has ended up being more the domain of women than it is for men. And I take an interest in that. It's not something which makes me feel like I'm anyway in the wrong or doing something that's naughty or different or, you know, culturally inappropriate.
But how do you respond to people if they do give you about it?
I don't see it as about it. Like it's someone acknowledging or asking that it's that it's something more to do with a woman's hobby than a man's hobby. That's the beginning of a conversation for me. That's not a judgment. That's it's a statement of someone's position. It's a statement of someone's, you know, they're telling you something about their belief structure, which is that they haven't ever come across men doing that hobby before. And that's well, that's interesting. Isn't it funny? Yeah, turns out men can do it too. Like I don't, if you want to go to examples of it, there are examples of men that have knitted, and you know, people talk about, well, did fishermen knit, for example,
fishermen, yeah.
And I don't know how much of that is folklore. I also acknowledge that potentially as a man, like you are invading into an area which some women do identify as their own craft space, and that is something which they identify with. And I know that's different for different people, but there's a word in Icelandic which I came across recently, which it's something to do with like a women's knitting circle. The word for a group of women knitting together also means going out for the night and getting drunk, because it was a way. It's a way of describing that, women, the way I had it explained to me. Again, so I'm not reading this out of the Oxford English Dictionary, but the way I had it described to me was that when women were wanted to go out with their friends, in explaining to their husband where they were going. It was an excuse saying, "I am going to do work," in that I'm going to knit. Whereas actually it was a way of going to see your friends, and so it was a format of socializing. And the fact that that is one example, but the fact that you've got women have used it as well as as social context, and when you look at how knitting has progressed for women, you know more about this than I do, Georgia, but how women have taken something that was functional and how it has transformed eventually into a hobby for some, that transformation as well speaks to something which is largely owned by women. And as a man in that space, you're an outsider. But that's also what helps me be curious about it and be curious about people's attitudes towards it and want to have a conversation about it, rather than, I don't feel like I need to state any like ownership of it or like that it has to be my hobby as well or anything. It's just something that, well, I've got hands and I can do that too. Like and in fact, as I say that, I've seen a video recently of someone successfully knitting with their feet. So who's to say who owns it? But I do recognise as well that there are some groups of women that do want to own certain parts of that more strongly. But I don't think you're likely to be encountering those if you're knitting in a pub.
I think we've talked about this at other points, like arriving into a situation and feeling that the space was actually, even on a subconscious level, was a safe space or a shared space for women, even if it hadn't been defined as such. And then you arrive into that situation and there's some kind of awkwardness or there's some kind of push and pull where on paper you might be welcome, but maybe because they're just not even imagining or considering the idea that a man would show up, or instinctively might think, of course men can come and that's no problem. And yet when a man turns up, the dynamic shifts, or you don't have quite as explicit conversations or straightforward conversations. And how does that feel for you? I
think it's a different point from knitting in public, because I think that's in a way, I mean, although that might be in public, it's also in a more private space. If you're going into a group,
that is true.
And to be honest, like it feels weirder the first time than it does the 100th time. But that's probably just like anything. I mean, recently, I run these retreats, Make a Getaway. We actually got a question from a guy saying, "Are men welcome on these too?" And what made me laugh about that was that I remember writing to a retreat a few years ago that I was really interested in going on, and that was the first question that I asked too. I said, "Are men welcome on this?" Because I totally there's nothing on your website about it, but like I don't want to invade if it's actually not for men, and I'm totally fine with that. But I just do want to know before I book. And of course, Make a Getaway is absolutely inclusive for everyone. And it's something I just, I see less of it. I think knitting in public, the interesting thing about knitting in public is that it starts conversations.
Well, and it's that general experience and understanding of something, stereotypes, if you will, like we talked earlier about like the library trope. I suppose, that there is absolutely that belief that knitters or that craft or that textiles is intrinsically female. Sorry, my brain is just like frazzled. I'm going to put my glasses on.
Just for continuity there, I'm just going to acknowledge that we're having a little cut and George has put her glasses on. It's one of those things that if you're reading a book on the tube, or you're reading a book on a train, or you're reading a book in a waiting room or on a park bench, no one is going to, like, very rarely is someone going to stop you and say, oh, that's an interesting book. Can I ask you what's happened in this chapter, or why are you reading that book? That doesn't happen. Well, my understanding of social norms is that doesn't happen very much unless someone recognizes the book or the author. Maybe then you've got a conversation starter. The big difference with knitting is that as soon as you take your knitting out, people see you doing something and are like, oh, there's a conversation starter. And they either feel, you get the people who think I can make a clever comment, and they're the people that they want to make a clever comment. They're walking down the street looking forever for, like, where am I going to make my next funny comment? And there's also people that just want to have a chat with you. And because you're knitting, you are open. You create a more open space for that. And as a man, absolutely, you're inviting the whether you want to or not, you are absolutely inviting the conversation starter. What I would say is, if you want to move away from that, if you want some advice on that, if you want to knit in public and not get asked a question, stick headphones on. And I promise you, it cuts down 95% of all questions or interruptions in public. Stick headphones on, you won't get asked questions. Mm-hmm. Oh, I mean, I say that, now everyone's going to go and try it and find out you will, but it massively reduces it.
I will say, as a woman, when I'm in situations and I don't really want people to come and chat me up, that does work. That does work. So maybe if you don't want people to come chat you up about your knitting, then you could try that. That's like a tip of, like, by the principle of universal design. It helps everyone. I think it's nice to think of it as, okay, someone's showing this interest or engaging with you. Maybe even if they meant it as a shady comment, that you can almost reframe it for yourself, and you can twist it around and be more positive in the response, and almost as if you didn't recognize that someone was giving you a little bit of a dig. It's got this big, long history and association with women, that's not something that you're shying away from, that you're acknowledging that, and acknowledging that you're maybe not part of the predominant gender that is involved in knitting, but that's okay, and that's not an issue. I suppose it comes back around to that question of intent. Like, is someone being with you? It was ages ago before the podcast. I think it was like last summer. We were sat having a chat, and you told me about you were knitting in a pub of an evening, and they were these drunk guys who wanted to talk to you about your knitting.
It wasn't just they wanted to talk about my knitting. They wanted to knit.
Yeah. And when you told me this story, I was getting the vibe that your feelings were like, sticky drunk people on my yarn, but also fun. And when I was hearing this story as a woman, I was like, drunk men. And so there was more of a question and a feeling of, like, personal safety and of
exactly.
intent.
And this is where our experiences are so vastly different, because as a straight white man, I was sitting in somewhere between a pub and a club. Like, it was after normal closing hours. It was probably midnight. I was sitting there with a pint of beer, with my knitting in the corner, just happily knitting away. And these two drunks come up to me, and like they look for someone to sit down. They sit down next to me, and then they just start talking and then saying, "Oh, give us a go." Like, I won't mess anything up. Like, just give me a knit. You teach me how to do it. And you're right. My concern was all about, well, no, because I can see you're spilling your beer and you can't do anything. I'm not giving
the fact
that
that you
to
took that on face value and you didn't take it as some kind of, I don't know, hate crime.
But also, that is, again, this where our experience is so incredibly different, because as the guy that I am, I don't get hit on in pubs. Like, it's just not part of my world experience, let alone anything else that goes on more negatively, outside of that. And that's your experience as a woman is massively different from mine there. And that probably influences very heavily the amount of confidence I have saying to those people, gently pushing them aside and saying, no, I'm not doing that.
Well, it's the situation. Knitting in public, I mean, me personally, like I wouldn't be on my own in a club or a pub close to midnight on my own, regardless, let alone knitting. So it's like, it's a very different conversation. Though the knitting in public, the perception thing, I do relate to you on the, isn't that a women's thing? Because I get that a lot about age. Sometimes it's, people looking to be sassy. And sometimes it's actually people just working from the experience that they have. And they go, I remember being in a taxi once and I was, knitting my little sock. And this guy said, wow, I didn't even know that people knitted anymore. I've not seen anyone do that since my grandmother in like the 70s. It was like an older guy and he'd not seen it and he didn't know it was a thing. And there was a place where I could get offended about that. But actually, I don't think it was coming from that place. It was coming from like, wow, you're knitting. And he thought that in some way that was an extraordinary thing that I was doing that. And like you say, it reveals people's inner structures, their inner thought processes. So if you have an opportunity to challenge that and, even just by gracefully accepting the thing that they've said.
I'm so pleased you said that because I thought you were about to say I was really offended that he said I was old. And I was going to pick you up on that, saying he's not saying that because it's just genuine. I think for a lot of people, it's just genuine intrigue that they see. I don't know, what's something else that you could see someone doing that you hadn't imagined being doing for the last 100 years? If someone was setting up a letterpress or something, you'd say, well, I thought printing presses, I thought we gave up on doing those manually quite a long time ago. But, someone is there keeping it alive.
And also when people say that I'm young, it means the retinol's working.
Which product placement is that, sorry?
Oh, no. It's nothing in particular. I use a range, but yeah.
Early on when I started out on Instagram as well, I think I got a lot of assumptions, certainly in my DMs about my sexuality as well. Like that was something that came up too. And again, that was something as well with. It's not something that's knitting in public. It was something that was very much associated with Instagram. But again, it's people's presumption about knitters, and the presumption was that I was gay because I was knitting, and that came across very strongly in DMs that I had early on. But again, I find that interesting rather than anything to be upset about. I guess that's the attitude that I carry forwards, and how I try and interact with people is that I'm always just interested in why did someone say that, unless it's just outright offensive. But I've knitted in public so many times and no one's ever said anything offensive to me about it. Mm-hmm. cue a week of me going out knitting in public and being shouted at.
Weren't you at a pub once, now that you have brought up sexuality? Because I wanted to ask you about this story, but I wasn't sure if you were going to acknowledge that. And you were somewhere and you asked for a recommendation or a place to go? Where were you, in like deepest, darkest Devon or something?
It was. Oh, thank you for reminding me about that story. Do you think I'm all right to tell it?
Yeah. Because it's interesting, and we had a very fruitful, interesting conversation from it as well.
We did. I mean, it gave me so many fascinating conversations as a result. Yeah, so I was sitting there having dinner, and I was by myself, and two couples came in. They were really drunk at that point, and they were full of banter. They were having the most wonderful evening. They were just so full of good humour, but they'd had way too much. Anyway. At the end of the evening, I thought, well, if anyone's going to know, like, where's a good pub to go, and it'll be somewhere that these people know. We talked plenty about knitting in the intervening time, and and as I'm getting up to go, I said, are there any bars you'd recommend around here? And one of the guys just says, "Oh, I'm sorry, we don't have any of your sort of gay bars around here." And I was, and the surprise to me was that there was nothing in our conversation to go on that was the bar that I was looking for, which I wasn't. The only thing to go on was the fact that I was knitting. But it was there are so many good things about that as well as some bad things. The wonderful thing is I was in an environment, obviously, where it was just a fine thing to just have a chat about, and like someone trying to be helpful and just saying, well, look, it's a small local town in the middle of nowhere. We don't have gay bars. Like, fine that we're just openly talking about sexuality in that way. Certainly go back 20 years and that wouldn't have happened. On the other hand, I do feel slightly negatively that you want to draw conclusions about. It's like if you saw someone knitting, you automatically assume that they should be an old lady. That's not true. And the same is true. It doesn't define you in any other ways. It doesn't define who you are in any way.
Mm-hmm. And it's stereotyping in a damaging way and limiting for people who do identify in a particular way. And I think at the time we talked about how, someone saying you're gay, I remember when I was at school, and that was still very much like a thing that people would say to you as a negative. It's funny because I grew up in a very affirming situation where if I was gay, it wasn't a problem. So I was almost kind of confused when I got to school and people were like, oh, you're gay. And they meant it negatively. And I didn't get it because I didn't associate being gay with being a negative. But it was coming from it was a very working class area and very industrial area that still was holding on to a lot of those feelings. And from my understanding now, and when I go back home, times have changed and shifted even in the last 10, 15 years since I've been in secondary school. So, transparently wise, it's not that I've not said this or acknowledged this. Like you say, people assume sexuality. I'm not straight. I'm married. I'm married to a man, but I identify as being queer, and yeah. So I probably should have prepared a more eloquent way of coming out. But the thing is, I grew up. I didn't even have a coming out because it was so normal in my family, and so it wasn't a negative. And then I got to school, and then suddenly that was being labelled. And I was like, well, yeah, I am. What's the problem with that? And it's that question of intent. Like that was being, I'm not saying that it's, it's okay for people to use that negatively because it's not actually a negative thing, but it's a question of intent. When that guy in that bar was saying, oh, I don't think we haven't got any gay bars here, I'm sorry. Were they looking for a very roundabout way of trying to be inclusive, of helping you feel welcome and say, I'm really sorry, we actually don't have any gay bars here?
100%. It was Mel in a nice and genuine, like he was being thoughtful about how he was positioning that. Absolutely.
But then in a weird kind of backhanded way, it's like, but you can't go to normal bars. But then I don't think that's what he was saying either. He was just trying to tend to what he thought your needs were and what with maybe his limited interactions with, or his limited understanding, thought that a gay man would have to go to a gay bar. I don't know. I wasn't there. But unpacking that situation from my very limited queer perspective, I would like to acknowledge that I very much pass as a straight woman. I have that privilege, So...
But that's exactly it. I acknowledge I'm in a very privileged position in so many ways that when I do come across comments or commentary, there's a lot of privilege embodied in my ability to be able to just treat that with good humor, with with inquisitiveness, just to be able to engage someone, because in the most part my experience allows me to do that, and I totally acknowledge that definitely isn't the same for everyone. And so I'm, in a way, maybe I'm an appalling person to ask about what's it like knitting in public, because my experience of it is probably so very different from so many other people's. But I would say, for the most part, I've always been able to treat it with good humour, and in general, people are just fascinated by it. And if you treat it as fascination, I'm also someone that loves educating people, so that, I just see it as another opportunity to educate people. When I don't want to educate people, I stick headphones on. I say, if you're interested in knitting, go and see my Instagram.
Lol. Little business cards. Shifting tack here a little bit. About knitting in public and the appropriateness of when you can knit in public and when you can't. Business meetings, work meetings, all these kinds of things. My research group, very used to the idea that I focus a lot better if I've got a little stockinette project on the go. And so it's not that unusual. But when we have our coffee morning and we have a guest there, I do see sometimes that it's not putting people off, but that they're like, oh, she's knitting, odd. But then I'm very, very comfortable in that environment. So I'll often be there in, leggings, and if I've got like a bad period day or something, I've got like my hot water bottle, and I'm just, I'm very used to it. And that's a fairly casual environment. Contrasting that with perhaps a more formal situation, it was Deemer's graduation at the weekend, and I was sat in Senate House and he was getting his degree. The 2 times I've been in Senate House for graduations, both times I have been sat in front of the live stream camera that also takes the pictures of the graduation thing. And I was expecting to be able to sit there for like an hour and a half knitting my little sock and waiting for, everything's in Latin. It's like this really long, very quiet, boring situation. It's not boring. It's a very special moment. Deems was in the last little cohort of 3 colleges. And my dad and I were sat right front and center. We are in everybody's graduation pictures, like everyone's.
No knitting.
Well, no, I didn't, because I thought there was going to be another row of people. But the funny thing is that I prepared myself to knit. I had a coat on. I was knitting colourwork socks. So I put 1 ball of yarn in this arm of the coat and 1 ball of yarn in the other arm of the coat. And then they asked everyone to stand up for the entrance of the Vice Chancellor and everything. And they start wandering in. And I was like, oh no, okay. And so I just sort of clamped down like a chicken on my arm so that the balls didn't fall down. I thought, no one's coming to sit in front of me. And I had to sit there the whole time with these knitting needles just like sort of clutched and pressed to my stomach because I was attached on both sides.
That's amazing. Did you tell me? Did the balls of yarn? Did they go through your sleeves of your coat out?
No,
through
because I clamped on for
wrists?
dear life. I got it right in the wedge, and I just was like, right, chicken time. And
amazing.
Yeah, but that's happened to me twice now, where I've been sat in this one section, and they give you a little warning at the beginning. They say, everyone in this section, just bear in mind. Think about what you're doing, because you're on camera and you're going to be on everyone's mantelpiece for the next 50 years.
Brutal.
But it is lovely because Deemer's graduation picture also has me and my dad in it, which is nice. So very cute. But I don't know. That is one of the rare situations where I've decided, okay, I'm not going to knit here. Because generally, I've knitted at formal dinners.
When we've talked about this, you've knitted during concerts as well, haven't you?
Oh gosh, yeah. I've got a funny one about that actually.
Where you use quiet needles and you're very quiet about it, but you're not disturbing anyone. So there was a concert in Ely Cathedral a little while ago that I went to, and I knitted through the whole of that concert as well, because I was knitting in a place where none of the performers could see me and I wasn't disturbing anyone else around me. And I probably knitted at half the speed I normally would, because I was doing it very slowly and carefully, because I knew no room for mistakes, no room for dropping anything. But, why not? But I won't knit if a performer can see me or if I'm going to be disturbing someone else.
So I agree with that. I won't knit if I am disturbing someone else. Generally, performers, speaking as a performer myself, it's weird. I'd not really considered it from that angle. Maybe because I myself would be like, oh, a knitter, and wouldn't mind. But yeah, I suppose I wouldn't want it to be visually distracting. So I'd want to be like maybe not front row. And that was the thing with the pictures, that even if I was on front row at the graduation, I didn't want to be there without people in front of me covering my hands. I remember early on when I was knitting, I hadn't quite cottoned on to like the noise that my metal needles were making versus other ones. And so there was this contemporary music festival I went to where everyone was being very polite and like didn't say anything. And then I found out at a certain point in the week that there was one of the professors was like, yeah, well, they do make a little bit of a clacking sound, which is maybe a bit disturbing in quieter pieces. And I hadn't even really clocked that it was audible to other people, despite having very sensitive hearing. And that was like mortifying for me, especially someone who's, got a degree in contemporary music. Like I hated that idea.
Yeah, but the thing is, you don't, as a knitter, you stop hearing the clack of the needles because your brain just filters it out because it hears it constantly. So that's why you don't hear it. I don't think metal needles are acceptable in a public quiet space.
No, exactly. And so I learnt my lesson very quickly with that. And once I'd like heard and acknowledged it, because I hadn't knitted with wooden needles before, once I realised there was an alternative, I was suddenly like, I can't really go back to metal needles, with the exception of like the Addy Wonder socks. I like those for colour work, but I won't knit with metal needles anymore. I do have a funny story about knitting in concerts, though. So my bestie is a disability researcher, disability history, and she's deaf. And it's one of the reasons I feel very passionately about having transcripts available for the podcast. So we went to this concert. We were with my mum and my stepdad, actually, and we had a spare ticket. And we'd maybe been friends for about a year at this point. I didn't know whether or not it was like the right thing to do to invite my deaf friend to a concert. But she was living in London at the time. We were down in London and my parents said, oh, well, have you got any friends? You could come use this spare ticket. And I thought, well, Kirsty, but, am I supposed to invite my deaf friend to a concert? I don't know. So I called her and I video call because she's lip reading. And I said, I don't know if this is offensive. I'm really sorry if it is. But would you like to come to a concert? We've got this spare ticket. It's at the Barbican. And it was the Cronus Quartet, who are a really well-known contemporary quartet. You've probably, in various bits and bobs, maybe even heard their music. And it was their birthday concert, like celebrating, I want to say 40 years or something like that. Yeah, she came along. It gave me a really interesting insight into how musical events are accessible and inaccessible. And she doesn't have a cochlear implant, but she does wear hearing aids, so she could like mix in with a loop and stuff. The T-loop. So I was knitting with my wooden needles in my customary way that I would in a concert, that it's not disturbing. But I offered my friend a fidget toy, like a little fidget cube thing. And because she's deaf, she didn't hear that it was making clickety-clackety sounds. And I hadn't, because I normally knit, I don't normally have fidget toys in concerts. So I hadn't realised that it was clickety-clickety. And I was getting evils from like everyone around me. My friend was like completely oblivious to this, had no idea, just enjoying the concert, enjoying the visuals. And so I realised that everyone was looking at my knitting and thinking that the clacking was the knitting. So even after I stopped, the people immediately around me, I had to stop knitting because there was an association of the sound. And then in the second half, we actually moved seats because there was some available. And so thankfully we moved to a different location. But I had to tell Kirsty, like, right, you can't hear it, but that fidget toy, I'm going to give you a different one because it's really noisy and everyone is shaming me for knitting. So we switched.
I need to be able to keep knitting in peace. Thank you very much.
Yes, exactly. So people hear different sounds and they hear different things. I think as a neurodivergent aid, or as something that can help some people with their focus and give them like that little bit of extra stimulation to be able to enjoy something. I will say that since I've been knitting, I enjoy concerts a lot more and I enjoy contemporary music a lot more. And I think I love contemporary music. It was my jam for years. It still is. There is something when I'm able to be there and be more present, like if I was in a meeting or if I was doing some work, it really does help me. And I feel more engaged. I feel more present because I've got that extra thing to do with my hands. So
I'm going to have to talk about knitting in meetings and at work another time because we are out of time for recording today.
Yeah.
And we're going to have to wrap this up. But we should definitely come back to that because I have many thoughts on knitting in meetings, which are just going to have to wait. And I'm sorry about that.
I know.
Should we talk very quickly about what's coming up in our next episode and next series? Because this is the last.
Yeah. So we're going to have a little bit of a break, a bit of a pause before things.
Just for a few weeks.
Well, I've got to figure out my PhD again, please.
Well, so within the next series, we are going to do some interviews with other people. And some of those we're going to do solo as well, which might enable if I can do one or two of them without Georgia and I can then edit them, then it does mean that Georgia can get on with a bit more of her PhD. That's the intention anyway. But we also want to do an episode where you get to ask us questions. So if you've got questions that you want to ask us, then do drop us an email if there are topics that you would like us to cover. Either topics you'd like covered or a whole episode, or specific questions you'd like us to ask one another during a sort of more interviewee one, but you're interviewing us.
Yeah.
And also, if there's any suggestions for people that you are desperate for us to invite onto this podcast, you'd like us to interview, then we're all ears. We have a long list of people that we've composed anyway. We'd love to hear your thoughts and suggestions too.
Yeah. It's always good to have interview ideas, topic ideas. I have a big long list, and sometimes they get reordered, and we do things when we're feeling in the zone for it. So like today, we weren't planning on doing knitting in public, but we are today. And so having those suggestions would be really, really great. And please, if you have any pun ideas for an outro, very welcome, very welcome.
We won't shush them.
We're not. It took me a second to process that. Don't bring the trope back.
When am I allowed to make jokes, Georgia? Oh, when I've got the sign. Sorry, I should have been illustrating a sign whilst I've been sitting here.
Alas.
Sorry.
Thank you very much for this chat. It's sort of been meandering. I fear that we sort of front-loaded the planning on the housekeeping to make sure we definitely got through all of these points, and then got to the knitting in public chat, and then just went. We maybe should have had more structure there. So yes, you will be having another episode at some point on working and knitting in professional meeting situations.
If you happen to come across this podcast, just listen to this episode for whatever reason, then don't forget to subscribe. And if you're already subscribed, then share it with a friend.
We try to make this episode self-contained, or we're trying to, sort of. So I imagine you can probably skip certain topics or send a certain topic to a friend. We're seeing more of that in our listener stats. So sort of like pinging about a lot more.
Thank you very much for listening. You've been listening to the Yarn Library podcast with me, Adam Cleveley.
And me, Adam Cleveley.
You've been listening to Yarn Library podcast with Adam Cleveley at Cleveley Knits and me, Georgia Denham at Tulip Hole. If you enjoyed this podcast, please like, share and subscribe. And if you didn't,